Have you ever been humiliated in front of hundreds of people you love, with nowhere to hide, and no way to hold back the tears that burn your eyes while everyone pretends not to see? That was me, standing at my own son's wedding, dressed in a simple sari I had ironed myself the night before, holding on to the only piece of jewelry I still had from my late husband, when my daughter-in-law, yes, the bride herself, looked me up and down and laughed. Her words, soft but sharp enough to cut me open, floated through the air like poisoned arrows. You should have stayed home. This is not your place anymore. For a moment, the music seemed to die, the laughter dimmed, and every memory I had of raising my son, sacrificing, starving some nights so he could eat, working until my bones ached, flashed before me. I stood there frozen, shamed, as people around me tried not to stare but couldn't stop themselves. My son, my only child, the one I had poured my entire life into, didn't even defend me. He was too caught up in the grandeur of his wedding, in the shining lights, in the guests who mattered more than his mother's dignity. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the chair, praying I wouldn't fall. But inside, something else stirred, a fire I thought had long been extinguished. Because humiliation has a way of breaking you, but sometimes, it also awakens you. And in that moment, standing at the back of the hall, I realized I had one choice left. I could either shrink into silence and let her words define me, or I could take control of the story that was about to unfold. So, with every ounce of strength I had, I picked up the phone, dialed the number I had promised myself I would never call, and waited for the voice on the other end. And before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stop for a second, breathe, and imagine yourself in my shoes. Because what unfolded after that phone call changed everything. Not just for me, not just for my son, but for every single person in that wedding hall. And trust me, you don't want to miss this. So make sure you subscribe right now, because stories like these aren't just tales, they're lessons about respect, dignity, and the unexpected turns life takes when you least expect them. The hall was bursting with chatter, the kind that makes you feel like you're drowning in other people's happiness while your heart cracks silently inside your chest. I stepped outside to the corridor, the cool air brushing against my burning cheeks. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the glowing screen of my phone. The number I was about to dial wasn't just a contact, it was a shadow from the past, a person I had sworn I'd never trouble again, because the last time I did, it brought consequences that shook more than one household. But humiliation has a strange way of tearing down every wall of pride, and in that moment, nothing mattered more than reclaiming the respect that had been trampled in front of strangers. I pressed the green button, and after a pause that felt like forever, a deep, steady voice answered. It's been a long time. Are you sure you want to do this? My throat tightened. The memories of late nights working extra hours just to afford my son's education, the arguments I had with relatives who told me a widow could never raise a child properly, and the countless insults I swallowed in silence, all of them flooded me at once. Yes, I whispered, though my voice cracked. It's time. The person on the other end didn't question further. Stay where you are. 10 minutes. I slipped the phone back into my bag, my pulse pounding so hard I thought I might faint. When I returned to the hall, I saw her, the bride, my daughter-in-law. Laughing with her friends, tossing her head back with that cruel smirk that had gutted me just moments earlier. My son stood beside her, a glass of champagne in hand, avoiding my eyes. I sank into a corner chair, invisible to most, watching the glittering lights bounce off crystal chandeliers, listening to the endless clinking of glasses, the artificial toasts, the speeches about love that felt empty. Nobody knew the storm that was about to sweep into this hall. And when the heavy doors at the entrance opened with a force that silenced even the band, I knew the past I had hidden for years had just stepped inside. Guests turned, gasps erupted, whispers spread like wildfire. For there, in the doorway, stood a man no one expected to see at a wedding like this, a man whose very presence carried the weight of authority and power, the kind that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. My daughter-in-law's smile froze, her glass nearly slipping from her hand. My son's jaw dropped, and for the first time that night, his eyes darted to me, wide with shock. Because the man standing there was not just anyone, he was the one person whose respect for me could silence every mocking word in that hall. The silence that followed his arrival was thick, almost suffocating, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat echo like thunder in your chest. He walked into the hall with calm, deliberate steps, his sharp suit tailored to perfection, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his presence commanding without needing to say a word. People leaned toward one another, whispering furiously, trying to guess who this stranger was, but deep down, many already sensed that he was someone far beyond their social reach. My daughter-in-law, who moments earlier had worn her arrogance like a crown, shifted uneasily, her laughter dying in her throat. My son looked like a boy caught with his hand in the wrong jar, confusion and panic flickering across his face. The man's eyes scanned the room, ignoring the stares, the murmurs, the sudden hush of the music, until they landed on me. And when he saw me, his stern features softened in a way that stunned everyone present. He walked straight toward me, his pace quickening slightly, and then, before the entire gathering, he bent down, not just shaking my hand but bowing his head with genuine respect. Gasps rippled through the room like waves crashing against stone. "It has been too long," he said, his voice warm, filled with a reverence that made my throat ache with unspoken emotions. My daughter-in-law's eyes widened, her painted smile faltering as though she was trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't even know existed. You know her," she stammered, stepping closer, her tone suddenly stripped of its earlier cruelty. The man turned slowly, his sharp gaze fixing on her like a spotlight. "Know her?" He let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "This woman is the reason I stand where I am today. She is the one who pulled me from the ashes when no one else would. Without her, there would be no empire, no fortune, no legacy with my name on it." The hall collectively exhaled, some with awe, others with disbelief, while my daughter-in-law's face drained of color. I could see the panic rising in her, the way her fingers trembled against her gown, her confidence collapsing under the weight of his words. Guests who had turned their backs on me earlier now craned their necks, their eyes flicking between him and me, re-evaluating everything they thought they knew. My son swallowed hard, suddenly realizing that the woman he had taken for granted his entire life was far more than the background character he believed her to be. The man's voice carried across the hall like thunder breaking a storm. "You called her unworthy? You dared humiliate her under this roof? Then let me tell you, if not for her sacrifices, none of you would be standing here in silk and gold today." A stunned silence followed, broken only by the faint clatter of a fork dropped by a nervous guest. My daughter-in-law's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her arrogance had withered, and all that remained was the undeniable truth written on every stunned face in that hall: the woman they had mocked was not just a mother but the cornerstone of everything that mattered. The air in the hall grew heavier by the second, like a storm pressing down before the first bolt of lightning strikes. My daughter-in-law, her face drained of its confident glow, fumbled with her words, her eyes darting nervously toward her father and then to the man who had just elevated me in front of the entire gathering. There must be some mistake," she whispered, but her voice quivered too much to be convincing. She's nothing but a simple woman who," but before she could finish, the man raised his hand sharply, silencing her with an authority that made her flinch. "Watch your words," he thundered, his voice cutting through the hall like a whip. "If I hear one more insult from your mouth, you'll regret ever opening it." Gasps filled the room again, and I could feel the tide shifting in my favor. Guests who once looked at me with disdain now lowered their gazes, ashamed of the way they had joined in my humiliation earlier. Some whispered apologies under their breath, others straightened in their seats as though trying to align themselves with the truth that had just been laid bare. My son stood frozen, his mouth dry, eyes locked on the floor, unable to meet mine. I wanted to scream at him, to ask how he could stand there and let his wife degrade me, but my anger was drowned by a flood of pity. He was trapped between the woman he married and the mother he had neglected. But my daughter-in-law wasn't ready to surrender yet, her pride wouldn't allow it. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a weak smile onto her face, and tried to salvage what little dignity she thought she had left. "Maybe you're exaggerating," she said, her tone brittle. Respect doesn't change the fact that she isn't like us. She doesn't have. That's when the man erupted, his palm slamming against the nearest table so hard the silverware rattled and glasses nearly toppled. The sound ricocheted across the room, silencing her, silencing everyone. His eyes blazed with fury, and for the first time in years, I saw a fire in him that reminded me of the days when we had fought battles side by side, scraping and clawing against a world that wanted to break us. You dare talk about status, wealth, appearances, he roared, pointing at her with a trembling finger. Do you even know what real strength looks like? Do you know what sacrifice is? While you were dreaming of silks and ornaments, this woman was breaking her back so people like me could stand tall. She is the backbone of every success I have known. My daughter-in-law's lips trembled, tears pooling in her eyes now, not from genuine remorse, but from the sting of humiliation. She looked around desperately for support, but the room had already chosen its side. Friends and relatives shifted away from her, their expressions hardening as though they wanted to distance themselves from the arrogance they had witnessed. Even her own father bowed his head, ashamed that his daughter's cruelty had been laid bare before so many. The silence was now punctuated by soft murmurs of approval, nods toward me, whispers that carried words like remarkable, resilient, dignified. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of respect settling on my shoulders again, heavier and sweeter than any gold could be. But beneath that moment of vindication, a storm brewed inside me, a storm not just against my daughter-in-law, but against my son, who had stood idle while I was ridiculed. And as the man's voice softened and he turned back to me, saying, "You should never have been treated this way. You deserve the world's honor, not its scorn," I knew this night was not over. Something bigger, something final, was yet to come. The hall felt like a battlefield after the storm, every face tense, every gaze fixed on the wreckage of my daughter-in-law's pride. She stood trembling, her ornate jewelry glittering mockingly under the lights, but her confidence had shattered into fragments too small to gather. Tears streaked her makeup, her voice cracked as she turned desperately to my son. "Say something," she hissed through clenched teeth, but he remained frozen, his silence louder than any defense he could have offered. I looked at him, the boy I had raised with every ounce of strength I possessed, and for the first time, I felt more pity than pain. He was broken, torn between loyalty to a wife who had humiliated his mother and the guilt of abandoning the very woman who had built his life from nothing. But pity could not erase the years of disrespect, nor could silence excuse betrayal. I took a step forward, the weight of decades pressing behind me, my voice rising like thunder across the hall. "Enough," I said, steady but sharp, each word cutting deeper than any blade. "I have been silent too long, swallowing every insult, every humiliation, because I thought one day you would see me for who I am. But tonight, before all these people, I am no longer just your mother, I am a woman who refuses to be trampled." The hall erupted with murmurs, nods, even soft applause, as if the audience itself had been waiting for this explosion of truth. My daughter-in-law staggered backward, her pride unraveling thread by thread. She tried to laugh, tried to mask her shame, but the sound cracked in her throat like broken glass. Even her own father rose from his seat, his face pale with disappointment. "You've disgraced us all," he muttered to her, loud enough for the crowd to hear. That single sentence was the nail in her coffin. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, her arrogance finally reduced to ashes. My son, shaking, finally lifted his head and walked toward me, his eyes shimmering with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice small, fragile, almost childlike. "I should have stopped her. I should have stood by you." I looked at him for a long moment, letting the silence weigh heavy, before placing my hand gently on his shoulder. "You chose your path," I said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Now you must live with it. I will not carry your shame anymore." Gasps rippled across the room, but my words were not laced with cruelty, they were carved from years of truth. The man who had defended me stepped closer, his voice calm now, steady as a stone. "The world may forget," he said, turning to the crowd, but a mother's sacrifices are sacred. No one, has the right to treat her as less than she is. His words sealed the moment like a final judgment. Applause thundered through the hall, guests rising to their feet in acknowledgement, their claps echoing like justice itself. For the first time in years, I felt tall, not because of their applause, but because I had finally reclaimed my voice. I turned and walked out of the hall, not with bitterness but with dignity, my step strong, my head high, each stride echoing like a declaration: I was not broken. I was not small. I was not forgotten. Behind me, the chaos of the wedding dissolved into whispers and shame, but ahead of me stretched a path lit with freedom, respect, and the unshakable truth that I had finally, irrevocably, chosen myself. And as the heavy doors closed behind me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never again allow anyone, not even my own blood, to silence the power of my worth.